Okay, so this is our, I think, fourth installment of this kind of yield conversation through video conferencing. So today we're going to be talking to Bill Finger. He is an artist that actually just moved to the Midwest from Oregon, right?
No, Seattle.
Seattle, right. So uh, we actually showed us Bill's work in one of our online quarterly issues, and then we've been talking to Bill every once in a while, and thought we could get him on here and have a conversation with him about his work. And so we're just going to jump right in. As usual, I am Mike Rippey. I am the digital archivist and multimedia producer at the Snite Museum of Art at the University of Notre Dame. And I run the Yield Magazine project. And we're doing a variety of things with that. So if you want to go to our website, it's yieldmagazine.org and just check out the things that are going on there. And then, Bill, I'll just have you introduce yourself, and you can start talking about your work, and we'll just kind of jump in, ask questions as things move along.
Okay, so hello. My name's Bill Finger. I want to thank Mike for inviting me to take a part of this, to be a part of this conversation. I think it's something that's very interesting that you are doing with Yield, kind of inviting people in various aspects, and especially artists, to kind of get the word out a little bit about their work. So a little bit about myself, as Mike said, I just moved to Michigan. Actually, I'm in my what's becoming my studio here in Kalamazoo. So big change from with all of that. Otherwise, my work is a combination of photography and sculpture, in that I make they're scale model, but they're fairly large dioramas that I then photograph and then present the photographs. And I'm gonna skip to, as part of my introduction, share screen, I believe is the desktop. Share screen, let's see if I can do this. That's not the one I want. And everybody will please excuse me for one moment. Okay, so a little bit about myself. This is a very young Bill Finger. I think it's important for you to know a little bit about my background. This was me in 1987. My original background is in film production. This was actually the first film that I worked on. It was a King Kong movie. That probably no one really saw. But I thought it was very interesting and very apropos to kind of share this one. I think it's important to people to understand my background, because I think it relates to the way I work. And as far as working and kind of constructing these, essentially miniature sets that I'm creating and photographing. But I also thought it was interesting that the very first film that I'd work on would be a film that referenced this idea of filmically using scale in various forms, from miniature to, in this case, maybe not so miniature, to kind of create an illusion of, a photographic illusion, if you want to say. So there's definitely a reference to that. So after about 20 years in the film industry, in the film industry, I was an assistant cameraman. It's all very technical. There's no creative aspect to it. I really wanted to kind of start making something that was mine. And I'd always had ties to photography. And I went back to grad school. I had the opportunity, I decided to make the opportunity for myself to go back to graduate school. So in graduate school, I was photographing, doing landscape photography. I was in Rochester, New York, inundated with snow, and decided I had to be back I wanted to be in the studio. So this is actually one of the first images I made in studio. Actually, it was actually made on my dining table. I had been photographing bonsai trees, so because I was starting to get interested in this idea of miniaturization. But this was, I was also looking at how different people miniaturized or why they were interested in miniaturization. And so this is just some things I picked up from a model railroad store. I was looking at all the different ways that people kind of model reality, so to speak. And I created this image, and I think it's what kind of hooked me into working in miniature, because to me, there was something really interesting going on with it that kind of led me to kind of start doing some experimentation. So I'm kind of experimenting. I'm originally from the South, so I have to have reference to kudzu. But I'm kind of learning materials, kind of sorting through it, kind of thinking through it. So, you know, my depth of field is starting to expand. But as you say, I'll flash back and forth. You know, images like this is I'm kind of learning how to light this kind of landscape or this miniature. It becomes this. And just the clouds, as far as you can see, the clouds is just like the cotton batting that people make pillows with, but it can really be transformed as far as the way it's lit. This is the series that I worked through most of grad school for my thesis, dealt with ideas of memory as far as the photograph in its place in memory. So I basically tried to construct places that I remembered from childhood that I didn't have photographs of. And so it led me into some of these things. This is actually from a real place that the neighborhood that I lived in was basically cut in half by this kind of no man's land. But I thought it was kind of interesting because I was starting to you know, it may not look like it, but this is one of the first images that I started kind of using different scale because I was trying to do what's called forced perspective, where I have objects of differing scale to kind of compress space, or not compress space, expand space, just because you know, when I try to put the camera as close in as I can. The headache with that is depth of field. Depth of field is you're always fighting up against it. Even if you have the camera stopped all the way down, you're still very limited by that.
Right.
Let's see. And yeah, we were precocious kids. We found the culvert and decided to go tunneling, things like that.
Yeah, the first place I think I've heard of that, you know, compressing space, I think with the trick photography kind of thing was when they talked about Lord of the Rings and about how they would use different ways to compress space and make things seem larger or smaller, you know,
Right.
in a tighter area. And it's interesting that, you know, you have to use like a certain formula to kind of get all of these things to be sharp in a miniature scenario. And you know, I think people may not understand how using different sized objects, you know, helps to create that image and actually give you kind of the focus that you need for the depth. You know, like you said, I've experienced the same thing as the idea that, you know, if you are doing some selective focus and even stopping down a lot, if you're shooting miniature, you're going to get everything blown out anyway, like as far as the focus goes.
Yeah, I mean, the tough thing, and to me, the tough thing with miniatures or photographing miniatures is that, you know, depth of field is the first clue or the key that people, you know, realize that it's a miniature as opposed to you know, an ordinary photograph is just that shallow depth of field. And so trying to kind of fight against that as much as possible. So I'm going to skip over that. Even though this is actually one that's probably the closest to real scale, at least as far as the foreground. Anyway, another thing I wanted to point out, and this is something that the first time that I touched on this aspect of my work was in that same series when I have my show, my thesis show coming up. And I was at RIT, in Rochester, this well-known photography school filled with photography students. And I knew that was going to be one of my main audience for the show. And I was like, well, what if I slip in? Because I sometimes I have a little bit of a sense of humor, and sometimes I slipped in a ringer, so to speak. I wanted to reference a famous photo, a staged famous photo, and I wanted to see if anyone would catch it. So I created this and mixed it in with the others. And so it was a reference to Alexander Gardner's Death of the Rebel Sharpshooter. I was disappointed not as many people realized what I was caught on what I was referencing, but I wanted to kind of reference this. Like I said, I was fascinated with this idea because here I was playing with this idea of, all of it's stage photography, and it's playing with the idea of, how real is the photograph and how reliable is the photograph. But this idea of referencing well-known photographs is something that's kind of popped up in my work ever since. I guess one other thing I wanted to point out, and this is jumping in series, this is a later series, but it kind of demonstrates, kind of going back to what we were talking about as far as forced perspective, as far as just the difficulties sometimes you encounter from working in miniature. This is from a later series called Ground Control, but I'd taken a few photos just to show process, and I thought this one kind of demonstrated it the best, because one of the things I learned as far as trying to stage these things at different scales is really you have to set up the camera first is probably key, because you're building things, especially because I'm pretty much building almost everything you're seeing. You have to build or find things that are going, you're staging everything to the lens, the camera lens. So I just wanted to this is, to me, this has the best view of that. And if you look to the lower, just past the tripod head, there's like a little indent in the ground there. It's a little closer to it, and it just doesn't look like much of anything. It's kind of the lower left of the screen. And part of why, other than it's not fully, the image isn't fully dressed, but why it doesn't look like much is because neither of these two images are the image that's taking the photograph. Mm-hmm. As far as the final image. So it's not that particular lens. It's not quite even in this one, it's not quite from the same position. But when you look at it through the actual taking lens, that little non-consequential little indent becomes that. Mm-hmm. Becomes what became the final image, where it's this astronaut footprint in the landscape, essentially. A little side note, also to give you an idea, even though you were kind of seeing what the scale is, that people you should get a kick out of because I'm always looking for stuff that I think will photograph well in miniature, close up. So the leaf material is a type of oregano.
Oh wow! Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and then once again, it's talking about well-known mm-hmm. photographs, Neil Armstrong's.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is also from that earlier series. One other interesting thing I think that just to show that 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 has occurred in my work that that I've kind of repeated and gone back to a number of times. This was from that first series. And at that time period, I was shooting everything 4x5, so everything was view camera. And because of depth of field, I was backing up a little bit and then cropping into it. And so this was the original image, but I was getting ready to. I was getting ready to go to a portfolio review, Photo Lucida in Portland, and I wanted something to show process. Because I thought it'd be a good idea just to let people see, behind the scenes, so to speak. So this is the full frame of that, as far as that image. And something really wonderful happened to me. I think when I decided to print this, I really got fascinated with this as the image as opposed to the previous one. There's like a wonderful confusion, visual confusion that starts going on because you're seeing, off the set and seeing my basement, but it kind of becomes confusing. Where is the basement end and the miniature begin? So it's an image that I still keep it in my studio as far as to kind of play with that idea or reference idea, and it's actually resurfaced in my work in such as this, which is a series that I did on it was like a crime genre series. But I always do, I tend to, not maybe in all the images, but I do like to try to leave some sort of clue that they're miniatures. If you look at the upper right, you can see some clothespins that I left in. I mean, that was intentional. But this was kind of me trying to reach to that previous image, and kind of play with this idea of a constructed set, that's being revealed, even though it's not being revealed necessarily immediately as miniature. I will say that's the toughest thing for me probably is, I mean, I've had shows where I've, looked where people have made notes, or congratulations in the book at the door next to the gallery. And, you see sometimes people completely miss that it is.
Right.
So, I mean, that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to jump right in here and say that I've actually liked working in miniature also, and I've taken photographs before, and it's been a part of some specific kind of project, and this kind of thing has happened to me too, where I guess I do such a good job at photographing something that's in miniature that people don't even realize that what I'm trying to do. They just think it's a shot of like a chair in the corner. And they're kind of like, okay, that's great. You took a picture of a chair in the corner. You know what I mean? And then they just kind of blow it off to some degree. But when they realize, oh, wow, it's actually a miniature and you've actually created the space, then they kind of get more engaged with it. So I can understand why you would add kind of these little kind of, like you said, hints to show that this is something that you've constructed and built out, and it's something that you didn't kind of just come across and kind of document,
I mean, it's a tough thing because, I mean, the other thing is trying to divorce yourself from knowing what it is, and knowing and trying to look at it the way a viewer would see it fresh without those references. Otherwise, otherwise to me they all look terribly fake, and so it's really tricky, to see it in another form. I'll admit I've only had one, and I'll actually the slide will come up briefly. That to me, I looked at the final image and I was like, whoa! It looked way too real. Now, once again, this series, because had a reference to a well-known film as opposed to a photograph and reference Psycho. I'm just going to kind of skip through these a little quickly because of how much I've got. But I mean, where I was coming with these, after grad school, actually, lived in Los Angeles for a little bit and was working on like a CSI type, TV series. So everything was all about, it was all these stereotypical type sets, all these places that you'd see in a million different crime genre movies and TV series, hotel rooms or hospitals, nondescript hallways, what have you, but or interrogation rooms. So I started referencing that, and I think part of it is because we have on this series we have one stage that we would go to once a week. Once a week, it'd be a whole different set there, and it was amazing. And then you would, on the outside in the dumpster, you'd see the previous work set. And I was like, wow, that's just like a full-size version of what I'm doing. So, and then sometimes I asked if I ever used figures. I experimented with it in this series, and I've used it a little bit, but to me, it's a tough thing to use a figure, especially working this way, just because it typically gives away quickly that it's miniature or toy. Let's see. I'll just say, try to say, I probably, like I said, I probably crammed way too much into all this. This is one actually that I created. I do have some that don't necessarily fit into a specific series, but I did want to show this one because I asked if I ever show elements. I'm very often asked, do I ever show elements, or what do I do with the stuff after I photographed it? And I'll be quite honest. Originally, I throw everything away. I would keep nothing, and that was part of the idea of it. I have started keeping. I had a curator tell me, please save something because somebody along the line may want something. So after I had that conversation, I decided I created this image. I decided to have a little fun. I had a show coming up that was going to have this image. And I was very familiar with this gallery. It's a gallery in Seattle, or was a gallery in Seattle, that I noticed everyone would move through the space counterclockwise. And I was like, okay, because one of my problems with having the miniature and the photograph is it becomes an immediate back and forth. As far as you're looking at the miniature, you're looking at the photograph. You're looking at the miniature, it's like this immediate. And to me, that's a little disruptive. So what I did was, you're going through the gallery and you come upon this image, but the very last thing that you saw in the gallery before you left was the miniature itself. So I had a certain amount of space. You could kind of see the photograph from this position, but it was kind of obscured. So it made the person going through the gallery, it was interesting to watch, because I saw people like go and they'd hit this and they'd be like, oh, wait a minute. And they'd go back and they'd look at the photograph, and it was like suddenly this disruption in the traffic and people are going back and forth. So I thought that was a lot more interesting way to present it. And then I'm also asked if I, do I ever show, dioramas? And actually that same gallery, they had a show, and the only specification was they wanted me to show make a diorama. I was like, okay, I wanted to try. And I was working on that crime series, and their only specification was it had to have orange in it. And I was like, okay, so I made the carpet orange. But what I thought was interesting when I presented this, that people kept coming through and putting their cell phones into it and photographing. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine was like, do you want me to have them stop? And I was like, no, it means this is great. It was like, it'll never look anything like I would do. I was like, let them have at it. It means I'm not crazy. There's some sort of desire wanting to, people want to do what I do. And then of course, when after the show, I got it back to my studio and I couldn't leave it well enough alone. And so I got to photograph it, and it was kind of an interesting thing in that I could actually do like a film set. I could do multiple angles, and I could remove walls, remove ceiling pieces. and kind of create these images. And then we'll jump forward to ground control. And I don't know if you have any questions before I jump into this.
No, I think everything you're saying it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's interesting the way that last bit about putting the diorama in the show, and then the way people, like you said, you don't want to feel crazy, and people just seem to be drawn to this idea that they can create their own kind of little vignette, within this diorama. I think that's really intriguing also.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I want to go back to. I mean, I do. It's tough. One of the reasons I don't typically show the dioramas is all this is made fairly tentatively to be photographed. It's not really meant to last the long haul. So it really means, that I would need to construct these to be maybe a little more durable, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm.
But it is definitely something that I definitely want to explore further in the future.
Well, I'm just curious too, and in what way they were sharing all these images. Also, was it through did they share them through Instagram? Where did all this end up going? That they were taking, that they were photographing. So that's an interesting idea too. You give someone something to photograph, and then where does it go?
Which I'm fine with that. If it had ended up on social media or wherever. I mean, like I said, to me, it's not going to be the same image that
right.
And everything from lighting to what they're using to photograph. I mean, it's just going to be different in their own personal perspective, what have you.
Yeah. But I think what I used to struggle with when I was an undergraduate, I can remember this, is the idea that I was some things I was afraid to kind of move forward on because I didn't want anybody else to kind of take the idea. And then talking to other undergraduates after I graduated and other art students, it was always this idea that I'm not I want to make this, and someone else's could copy me and make the same thing, and I would have to remind them, no one's going to make it the same way you made it.
Right.
Your idea, if you tell someone your idea, the way they end up processing it and actually acting on it is going to be completely different than what's in your mind. So you can't keep yourself from doing work because you're afraid someone's going to redo it in some way. If they're going to redo it in their own, they could potentially redo it in their own way, but it's not going to be the same way that one person does it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think about what it makes me think of it. And when I was undergraduate and I was studying film, and one of the first film projects that we got, the entire class, I mean, it was like maybe 8 of us, we're all given the exact same scenario, script, what have you, to photograph or to make a short film. And that was part of the idea, is that even though it's got the whole same written scenario, all the same key elements, what the different specific characters are, it still ended up 8 different films.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I mean, sure, there's always that worry of somebody, of you losing an idea or somebody kind of borrowing or stealing your idea. But like you said, it's still not gonna end up being the same thing.
Right.
Now, as far as miniature, to me, when I first started doing this, of course, I'm thinking, oh, I've come up with something new, which I quickly found out, no, there's a long history of it. And there's a number of people that, very successfully are working in a similar a similar fashion. You know, it's just they're all different people.
Mhm.
I mean, there's one photographer that I remember meeting her a number of years ago, Lori Nix, and Lori and I remember we were sitting this was in Portland, and having a conversation about making little miniature trees, and we probably talked for like half an hour or more on making miniature trees, and that was the crux of it. And somebody afterwards said, that was the weirdest conversation I've ever had two people have. You know? But you know, it's just, you know, it's all part of it. You know, I don't know. It's kind of funny, you know. But anyway, I guess I'll launch into. I didn't even think about the word launch. I'll launch into ground control. Ground Control is a series that I worked on prior to the one I'm currently working on. It came out of an NPR segment. It was talking with a scientist. He was part of a team that's made a proposal for the best way to send a manned mission to Mars. And this was probably 2011. It's definitely become a hot topic now. At that time period, nobody was really talking about, or it wasn't the topic of conversation about, you know, space exploration as it is now. But their proposal was for it to be a one-way trip. That's the most economical because you don't have to take extra fuel. You can take extra survival stuff. And ever since they proposed this, they said they've been inundated with people all over the country trying to volunteer that think it's a program, and which it isn't. It's just you know, they're floating an idea out, and I just got fixated on all these people with no skill sets that would never in a million years be asked to go, but swear up and down that that's what they're meant to do, is to go off and, you know, give up everything on Earth and go live on Mars. And I was like, I wanted to explore that idea of obsession, this obsession with, you know, an idea of going to space. So, you know, I wanted to play around in that person's head in a sense. So, you know, I kind of created this protagonist who has his own spacesuit. You know, he's like doing selfies of himself in the mirror, you know, and I try to think this is skipping a little bit, but this is, you know, what is this person imagining life's going to be like? And they're thinking it's probably going to be this just joyous time, you know, that they just having this great time of, you know, taking the Mars buggies or whatever and jumping craters, you know, and what have you. And you know, does this person surround themselves with things to kind of prepare themselves to kind of learn about where they're going? And I also, you know, once again, like I said, I you know, I always have to have a reference to a well-known photograph, and this is actually a reference, you know, to this photograph by James Naismith, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He was a Scottish engineer in the mid-19th century that tried to photograph the moon, was unsuccessful. So he started making plaster models to photograph, and everyone celebrated him. They thought he had succeeded in photographing the moon, and he created a book of these images. But what I love this one because, well, one, it was his ideal lunar landscape. So I was like, I've got to make a reference to the ideal lunar landscape. But I love this because there was only this and I think one other one where he put himself on the surface. As opposed to everything else is like the point of view of looking through a telescope. So this is a miniature of a miniature. I will say it was a bit tricky to construct. And yeah, so they gave him, you know, have to give him a bon voyage party and let him blast off, or at least he's perhaps imagining, you know, blasting off. And then another reference to a well-known photo. This is actually was from the Voyager, one of the Voyagers that passed by Mars took this, and it became very controversial because everyone thought it was a face on Mars. That, you know, it's just a trick of the light. But I was like, okay, I had to have my own reference to it. So, because I'm thinking, you know, sure, he's thinking of this wonderful time, but as a counterpoint, this is pretty much what you're going to become as part of the landscape. I mean, it's not. It would be a short-lived triumph, basically. I mean, they said whoever went would be lucky if they lived 10 years. So our astronaut might, you know, want to keep in mind the other aspect of the nature of his voyage. And then I also wanted to include this. This was one because I often will create something that I photograph that I feel is unsuccessful and usually is never seen again. And this was such an image that I made during that series, but I kind of used it more as a sketch in a way because I did want to revisit it. I like this idea of him being so obsessed, almost like oh shoot, from Close Encounters, I'm blanking on his name, Richard Dreyfuss making
right, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted him doing something just totally nonsensical and trying to stack these chairs so that he could make a positioning like he's on a launch pad, you know, in this back position. But I didn't feel that it fully was easily accessible. And there was just some things I just felt that, you know, that weren't working with the image, that I just didn't give it enough time, I don't think. But I did revisit it and it became this, which I felt, you know, was a little more successful with the idea. And then, let's see, and then I've got this one, which is also referencing a well-known, you know, photo. This is probably out of all the images I've created, this has probably been the most asked about, the most, you know, sought after image that I've made, and it surprised me, I guess, how you know how people really just kind of gravitate to it. And then just a quick mention, because you know, so like I said, I'm making this all fairly temporary, but also will have objects that I want to make because I'm also interested in it from a sculptural angle, as far as it just being this unusual object or something that I want to make. So I did want to make the lunar module. So it took me 3 goes to kind of sort it out, because I was working from photographs. So trying to figure out you know, at least some of the scale relationships was a bit daunting. But I definitely, you know, 1, I wanted to make it, but 2, I also wanted to give our protagonist something in his backyard that I figured that he would make out of plywood that, you know, would be a simulator for him to, you know, prepare for his mission. Just because I figured that our astronaut would, when they said that the age was roughly, say, the same age as me, it would have a reference. They would have grown up with the Apollo missions. And then, I just threw this one in there. This is the only one that I've made that, at least when I saw the photograph, and it was part of a show for a small museum in Washington State. But it kind of floored me as far as it still probably looks the realest to me as to the ones I've created. But anyway, so we'll skip forward, continuing with space and I was talking about Voyager earlier. So after I finished ground control, and I went for a while because sometimes it's tricky to move into another series. And I had this idea that I wanted to work with the Voyager, but I was like, oh, do I want to do another space thing? I was like, I should do something else. And I fought it for a while, and I finally said, you know what? And, you know, if I feel like I'm not progressing, I'm not going anywhere. let's just make the Voyager, I'll build it, and then decide what to do with it, whether I want to continue with it, or it will keep me active. Because that can be the worst thing, in working this way, is death. It's almost like a death, in that if you don't make anything, it becomes easier to get distracted by other things. Anyway, I don't know how much anybody that's tuning in, or whatever you'd say, to this program, remembers about the Voyager, and that there was actually 2 Voyagers, 1 and 2, that are still out there, still pushing along. But I just loved the idea. I loved it visually, sculpturally, because when I working on a series, when I was working on Ground Control, I do a lot of research. I don't just kind of make these things. I definitely do a lot of research. I do a lot of reading, and I kept running into things about Carl Sagan and the Voyager and the Golden Record, and so that really kind of stuck with me. So I wanted to make something that at least referenced the Voyager, and referenced the Golden Record that Carl Sagan, curated this whole selection, essentially this message in a bottle. I mean, it's this collection of, encoded in this Golden Record, or, like 150 plus photographs, everything from Ansel Adams to, just scientific or snapshots, what have you. And then there's music and people saying hello in different languages, what have you. So, I wanted to, so that kind of make a reference to that. So that led me into this. And it was that idea of, there's 2 reasons, because everyone that sees this series, the first thing they ask me is, why round? Even though I'm starting to see more and more round imagery now. Like, I started this series 3-4 years ago. In the time period, people hated it as far as round. They were just like, I got so much pushback against the round image. They were like, do it, but just get rid of the round, make it square. And I was like, no, this is, part of it is referencing that Golden Record. I mean, that's part of why that particular framing of this view of the Voyager is just kind of referencing the record form. So I made a series of images of the Voyager, but I started thinking, different aspects as far as one, as far as this idea of the passage of time, how it's kind of really this human construct in a way, because if you think of the Voyager, the next time it comes upon possibly anyone that could ever access that Golden Record, it's going to be about 100. It'd be about 30,000 years from now. So I mean, anything that's found is not going to be have any kind of reference. But I just really like that idea of one of the message of the bottle, but also just taking this idea of time and making it kind of this human construct, just the way we kind of envision passages of time, and the way it plays with photography, the way it plays with memory. So I created this image of well, initially when I first started working with the Voyager, my original idea was to curate found photographs to go with it, and to have that as an aspect of it. But then I started taking those found photographs and working them into some of the images, or using them as reference material for some of the images. So like this one, I mean, all the images that are in this or found photographs. But I just wanted to kind of subtly deal with this idea of passage of time. So I didn't want it to be about a specific moment, but kind of the idea of maybe a longing for a place, or a memory of a place. And then just this whole idea of longing that kind of ties into this idea of what other kind of voyages are there, and that's really where the ideas of, say, longing originally originates out of this idea of someone that is gone, aboard a ship and perhaps never even comes back, or that person on the ship longs for home. And so just really started really playing with these ideas of different kind of passages in a way, passage of time, passage of space, and just a little behind the scenes shot of that. Because people often, they ask me about these, because they were like, how did I do the water? And it's just, so much of this is I'll come up with an idea, and then it's like, oh my God, how am I going to do it? And it's just experimentation. So it was just a board on my work table, and it's just paints and glues and what have you. Oh, you're probably wondering why you're looking at a trash can. So talk about headaches, because I mean, one of the other reasons I love working in miniature is that, like I said, you come up with an idea and you're like, how in the world am I going to make that happen? And so it's a lot of problem solving. And sometimes I'll have an image that just, everything I'm trying to do to create it is not working. And then the answer will present itself to you. And so I was working on there's a set of images I'll come to in a second. And I was trying to set in an airplane, and I wanted to make an airplane window, and I was trying to sculpt it. I was trying to all these different materials to make it, and they all look just terrible. They're just god awful, and I was about to give up on it. And I went home, and I was in our bathroom, and I looked down, and I saw this trash can, and I was like, that form of the trash can lid, the lip of it is what I'm looking for. And it's got that plasticky feel to it. So this photo is even, because I'll use my cell phone to make notes of things all the time. So I just did this to kind of look at, go, would this work? So then I took the trash can. I was like, well, my wife will never notice. I'll have a new trash can before she notices, So I took it. Here I'm playing my studio, cut the lid off, like, will this work? And so I start kind of working with it, and it becomes that.
Wow, yeah.
Now, what I will say is my wife, I don't know how she did it. I got home, I'm working on that. I've cut the trash can up. I haven't replaced it, but I just taken it earlier in the day, and sure enough, she comes home. The first thing she asked me is like, "Where did the trash can go in the bathroom?" I was like, "How did you know?"
Where else could it be?
But I mean, to me, it was worth it, So
yeah, definitely.
It became these three images.
It's funny that you referenced the golden record also, because the last interview I did on another project, they had referenced the golden record also, and this idea of, and they enjoy doing a lot of research with their work, and they're interested in science fiction and how biology functions, and how this is we're kind of evolving in the connection with technology. So it's interesting to see that even how that golden record, that idea has kind of affected both of you also, with this idea of like exploration and what's out there and what are we going to find, and is it alien, and how long does this take to happen? It's interesting that you both, and it kind of goes back to the idea that you guys both kind of had an idea that involved something that kind of abstractly, and you went in kind of different directions with it to kind of visualize it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting how certain ideas, will kind of, surface, and you're not quite sure what was the impetus for it, but other, different artists will kind of pick up on the same thing and start kind of working on, certain ideas that kind of have somehow presented themselves. I mean, I guess the other thing I like, I loved about the idea of the Voyager is, to me, there's just something very, very hopeful. I mean, it's almost childlike, because you think
Mm,
of a child, like I said, throwing a message in a bottle. I mean, this idea that I don't know that, we as a people would do now, as opposed to, 1975. I mean, I hope that they would, but it just, like I said, it's something that's just really wonderful about it. Really
mhm.
wonderful about it. One other thing I was going to touch on, the other aspect of of the round images. Like I said, and I think I guess I wanted to emphasize this one. Well, you'll see in a second, but two, this was the other aspect of it that really, you know, was playing my mind when I started thinking about making round images, is that because I do collect old photographs. I do not have this one. This one is of George Eastman. And I'm blanking now on the name of the ship that he was on. That I think it was Frederick Church, the painter, actually made the snapshot. Um, and but I just love this idea of the round snapshots that you still stumble upon sometimes. They're a little harder to find now. But if you just kind of look at it, there's just, I don't know, there's just something that really connected me. And especially when I was studying photography, this particular one of George Eastman. So I decided I'm referencing photographs. Well, I've got to make a reference to that. And so created these. To me, um, you know, I think part of it is, I wanted to reference that photograph, but also this idea of looking through through the world with round,
Mhm.
windows. Just this idea that there are other, the idea of round isn't, that everything is not rectangular, even, whether it's portholes or telescopes or what have you, that there, or microscopes or what have you, that there's that kind of, that round view. And I will say, this is probably the most, almost the most extreme forced perspective. To me, I think I maybe overdid it just slightly. But I will say the portholes are, because I was trying to figure out, and I was trying to make round portholes, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. And they're just like the clear filters that people put on, you put on to protect your camera lens,
Mm.
but they're just different sizes. Each one's, progressively smaller, or you can see there.
Mm.
But yeah, everything, even it was tricky because everything, extends. So you can see how, like, the wall I had to decide on what size to make it at the club, as far as next to the lens, and how far would it taper down, and the same thing with the slats on the you know on the deck. Everything kind of tapers in size. Even the railing, actually, it's hard to see it, but the railing actually even tapers
Mm.
as well, and even the columns that are on the wall actually progressively get smaller as well.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain it to some degree is I can't remember what these are called, but when you look at, you'll see some old Renaissance paintings and you'll see like a skull, like this
Oh yeah.
stretched out skull figure, image in a Renaissance painting, and then but you tilt the painting or the print or something at a certain angle, and the skull becomes life size, like it looks real at that point.
There's the painting, The Ambassadors, and now I'm blanking on who the famous artist was that did that. But if you look up The Ambassadors, and there's this odd kind of distorted view, towards the bottom of the painting. But if you look at it at an off angle, it becomes, like you said, it becomes a skull. And so it's kind of very, very interesting, this idea of kind of
Yeah, yeah, this manipulating the perspective. Because I thought, I don't think people will really understand it. I think I've seen it in some movies too, and that might help kind of explain this idea of the forced perspective. But it's, I think if people were to actually walk in and see the model that you're using, they would be like, oh, well, that is completely not what I was thinking when you took the photograph. So
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and that's the other thing that I think about, and if I have a gallery in the future where I have the opportunity to perhaps do it and the time to do it, I'd like to uh, essentially create one where it comes together only when you look through, say, an eyepiece of some
yeah,
sort, maybe not necessarily the camera. I've only had one that I mean, I that you looked at from a side angle and it looked just god awful. It just looked like a bunch of nothing. And actually, I was teaching at the time, so I had students over in visiting my studio, and I showed them that, and they were like, they're like, they're like 20 years old, and they're like, "What is this crazy guy showing me?" It was like, "This looks like nothing," And I said,
right,
"The lens." And so then they looked through the viewfinder of the lens, and it all came together, and they're like,
yeah.
"Oh, okay, whoa, okay, I get it now."
Yeah,
So
and there's even a history to that. I mean, one of Duchamp's last works, I think it's at Philadelphia Museum, is that one where you look through the little,
yeah,
eye hole, and it has forced perspective in that also. So it's like if someone's seen that, that would be a great example of how this kind of works.
yeah. I'm curious. There was a article recently that there's one um, uh, critic, or there's a or art historian that thinks that the people was meant to also be a projection somehow. So I'm not sure how that quite
Oh,
works,
wow.
but it would be interesting to see if for some reason that somehow you know would would project as well as looking into it and
Huh.
seeing it that way. I mean, to me, I think it makes more sense that being this idea of kind of a voyeuristic view.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it still commands that kind of interest, that much study, and kind of Duchamp is always kind of throwing uh, kind of throwing monkey wrenches at people, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
There's always a mystery. It's always it always circles back around somehow.
I must say, yeah. So, like I said, just some of these just very simple passes of time. But like I said, I really love this idea also of just not just memory but longing. So just this idea of like a kind of a warm summer day, just kind of longing back, kind of a sheep blowing the line. And then we go back to the Voyager. I think I'm almost at the end of the slides, which I may still make one or two more Voyager images, which unfortunately I don't have the Voyager model anymore. I'd have to make two. Actually, I want to make a Voyager 1 and 2 and have them kind of confronting each other possibly. So we'll see time-wise, because it was a pretty large thing, and it was originally meant it to be like this small object, and it kept just I kind of got a little carried away with it. But I did a wonderful friend of mine who's a wonderful painter in Seattle. He loved it, and I loved one of his paintings, and we made a trade. Oh, let's see. Oh, I forgot about the house, which I guess I also wanted to show the house because for some reason, I mean, just this idea of the lonely house is kind of, it has kind of resurfaced if you think back when some of the first images I was showing, with the house and the landscape.
Mm.
And then, oh yeah, this is the last one, which is actually so funny because I just put the, because I typically never put myself in the image. And actually I created this, every now and then I'll be asked by, for like a charity to, donate an image or create something for a charity event. And actually this was, I was like, oh, I'm not really even sure. So this was me, you know, I came up with this for a charity event, and actually it's, to be strangely enough, been a very popular image. So I figured it would be a good one to finish with, as far as at least my you know, whirlwind tour through probably a little more than maybe some people were expecting to have.
No, I think all this is great information, and I think it, you know, as a record as an artist, I think it's great to have this kind of information and just keep hold of it, and you know, and then continue to kind of follow along and see how everything develops. But I think it would be great to have, you know, I haven't tried this yet, but I think it might be interesting to actually present something as a, um, in this format, this kind of video conferencing format, and make it a just questions only kind of format. Like we don't even go through the portfolio. We just say, you know, Bill Finger is here to answer your questions, you know. So I think that would be great to try at some point too.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, the only tricky thing with that would be, you know, just, you know, depending on how many people are familiar with my work or have
yeah,
encountered it in whatever fashion, which you can never gauge. It's it's kind of an odd thing, you know. Every now and then I run into people that somehow knew about my work, which is kind of fun. And I think it's the, you know, the internet, I guess, essentially is kind of made connections that would never have happened, you know, 20 years ago.
right.
So, you know, there might be some of that, but you know, it's tricky. I wouldn't want to suppose that people would be necessarily familiar with my work.
Right, right. Maybe we have a caveat that you have to kind of watch the video, go to your website to get some
Right,
kind of background knowledge first.
yeah.
Well, we don't have anybody on the call, so I think what we'll do is kind of wrap it up and then see how everything works out on Facebook and the interactions we have there. Um, it'll be the video will be on Facebook, on YouTube, and on our website. So if you haven't been able to see it live, you can go back there and see the archive video. But I want to thank Bill for coming on. I think it's great that there are photographers and artists that want to kind of see how this kind of program or project kind of can work out and kind of engage people and, you know, get them more involved with connecting with artists and their work. So, Bill, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being involved with the Yield Magazine project, and thanks for being willing to come on here and talk about your work live. And you know, hopefully, I can get you to come back on again, and we can maybe even extend it into some kind of a panel discussion or something where we're, you know, working with artists working maybe in a similar fashion too. Maybe, you know, like you mentioned, Lori Nix and maybe a few other people. That could be an interesting conversation. Maybe have another tree conversation or something.
I imagine. I wonder if she probably didn't even remember that, but I think it stuck in my head. I can't remember that much about the conversation, but I do remember that woman's reaction, which was just priceless. Like I said, you know, it's like she just looked at me and kind of shook her head. I was like, that was really weird.
Yeah. The only artist conversations I think where that happens. Maybe, you know, other artists, musicians or something. You know, I don't know.
But thank you again for you know, inviting me for this. And like I said, I think this is a wonderful thing to start a conversation like this and keep it going. And I look forward to seeing, you know, I look forward to seeing the who's next, who you have coming up, and also really appreciate the interest that, you know, and that you've shown my work and the appreciation that you've shown that, and definitely a huge thank you to you for that.
Oh yeah. I love your work personally, and everybody that's seen it has really enjoyed it also. So yeah, I think if anybody wants to see what's coming up, they can go to the Yield website and you can see the events there. And you know, we're trying to get a pretty wide range of, you know, where different artists are in their career. So we're trying to get it, you know, to the really emerging artists and more the, you know, I don't want to say veteran, but like established artists, and then we might try to get some, late career artists too, if we can. It's such a different, I think, communication for them that sometimes it's a little off-putting, but we'll see what we can do. But again, thanks, Bill, and I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed talking to you. So I'll
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed it as well. Yes.
great, great.